Hello everybody. So Marius and I are so excited to be here today on stage for the second year in a row to talk about the Adobe Managed CDN. So for those who don't know us, I'm Quentin. I'm a software engineer at Adobe Basel, and together with Marius, senior software engineer at Adobe Bucharest, we are working together in the teams behind the Adobe Managed CDN. And today we will be talking about two new exciting features: AEM Edge Compute and the Edge OIDC Authentication. So before we dive into those topics, just a small disclaimer. Those features are not yet GA, but they are part of a beta program, which means we are working with customers that can test those features, provide feedbacks, so we ensure that what we are building can actually address your needs. So if you would want to talk, provide feedbacks, or test those features, feel free to email us at that following email address. Okay, so now, concretely, what do those two features unlock? So with AEM Edge Compute, you can now implement your lightweight business logic directly at the Adobe Managed CDN by being able to run JavaScript code at the edge. While with Edge OIDC Authentication, you can now cache private resources directly in the CDN cache. And from the edge, you will be able to do the authentications by connecting directly with your identity provider. So let's dive into the topic of AEM Edge Compute. First, what is Edge Compute? So basically, it's the ability for you to run your code at the most upper layer of your infrastructure, which is usually the CDN. It has various names from Lambda Edge, Edge Function, Edge Worker, and I'm pretty sure I'm missing some here. But in the end, they are all providing the same benefits. They provide a better latency because you will be running your code as close as possible from your users. And second, they will provide a better scalability because basically your code will be running in a well-established and well-relying infrastructure, being the CDN infrastructure. So now, why will you use Edge Compute? So to answer that question, we actually meet and sit with several of our customers to ask them where they will envision to use Edge Compute, what kind of use cases they will implement there. And by far, the top one use case was to be able to authenticate users at the edge. That's why we make it a special product, as well a special part of our presentation that Marius will talk about later. Now, the second most mentioned use case was to be able to serve personalized content directly from the edge. Such as based on the user, such as his location or what kind of device he is using to access your website. Another cool use case is to be able to do advanced request-response manipulation. So today you can already do some lightweight manipulations using the Adobe Managed CDN and the CDN rules. You can modify headers, things like that, rewrite the URL path. But Edge Compute takes it to the next level by giving you the ability to consume and modify the content of a request to the body, being able to parse JSON or HTML to add tags, for example. Another cool use case is the ability for Edge Compute to fetch content from multiple origins to stitch it together so you can only serve one content to your users. And finally, the last use case, kind of a hot topic these days, the ability to expose your API directly as MCPs from Edge Compute so LLM or agents can consume your data. So based on that, we started to explore what it will mean for customers to be able to run JavaScript applications directly in the Adobe Managed CDN that, as you might know, rely on fast infrastructure, with the primary use case to address the lack of compute for customers using HDRE services together with the Adobe Managed CDN. And so what we envision is for you to, we provide a way for you to provision several computes, depending on your needs, attached directly to your HDRE services or your AEM cloud service environment, and then to be able to deploy code using a command line tool that we provide. Of course, you're also in charge of the integration with the Adobe Managed CDN, so you will decide what kind of content gets routed to your Edge Compute using CDN origin selector rules. So how does it look like? So here we have a basic infrastructure with the Adobe Managed CDN, and then we provision two Edge Computes. One is called Edge Compute Proxy, the second one, Edge Compute Weather API. And as you might see, I hope you can see, we instruct the Adobe Managed CDN to route all the traffic on path/weather to the Edge Compute Weather API, and the rest will get routed to the Edge Compute Proxy that will then do whatever logic you implement here, and then route that to the different AEM instances, author, preview, publish, as well as AEM Live if you use HDRE services. An important thing to mention here, as you might see, is that the edge computes are actually sitting behind the CDN cache. So here as well, we respect the cache control headers, so it means only the content that is, or the request, if not cache, will go to your edge compute. So now, let's have a look at how you can provision an AEM Edge Compute. So for those who are already familiar with the concept of CDN configuration, as you can see, it's quite similar. So you create a compute.yaml file, and you put the following content. So it's a configuration of kind compute, where you can define a list of services. Each service has its proper name. Here we have one service called weather service. And then you can define configs that are the equivalent of environment variables and secrets. Now, how can you basically configure the routing aspect? So here you create a cdn.yaml file if you don't have one yet. You create an origin selector rules where you give, as always, conditions to the rule. So here we want to route everything under the path/weather. And then we use an action of type select AEM origin, and we give the origin name as an argument, so it's compute followed by the service name that we just defined before. And once you have those two files, you deploy that through the configuration pipeline. It should take 1-2 minutes, as always. And then if you try to access the weather endpoints using your custom domains, that request will get routed to your edge compute. So now let's have a quick look at how you can develop with AEM Edge Compute. So first of all, we provide a boilerplate. So it will allow you to build a simple app for AEM Edge Compute. You might have guessed by now, that app is basically a weather app that exposes simple endpoint/weather and gives weather information based on the IP geolocation. We also, for now, provide command line tools through a makefile as part of that boilerplate that will allow you to build the applications, to run it locally, so you can test it. And once you feel ready, you can deploy it with make deployed. It takes one argument, AEM compute service, which is basically the AEM cloud service coordinates or the HDRE service coordinate, followed by the name of your service. Once it's deployed, if you need to debug it remotely, we also provide a tool called the make tail logs that will basically stream the standard output of your edge compute back to your terminal. Quite handy for debugging. As you can see, we offer only direct deployment from command line, so there is no pipeline in Cloud Manager, at least for now. But that CLI can easily be called from your CI/CD. For instance, we provide a GitHub action example as part of our boilerplate. So with that, I hand over to Marius to talk about the Edge OIDC Authentication.
I will introduce the Edge Authentication as we implemented after discussing with several customers. As Quentin said, it was one of the most requested use cases for Edge Compute to build business portals, partner portals, intranets, and check the authentication before the cache. So the overall goal being to build scalable authenticated sites, essentially leveraging the CDN caching also for private content. So this is a very simple diagram to show why implementing authentication at the origin or even in an intermediate proxy powered by compute would not allow you to leverage the CDN cache. This is essentially because you want all your requests to be checked for the valid credentials. So you could implement this in the AEM origin or, as I said, in an intermediate layer, but you'll have to disable CDN caching. So starting from this problem, we implemented the edge authentication with two goals in mind. So first one is early enforcement, and the second one, it should be simple to deploy, no code. Early enforcement means to do it as quickly as possible when it reaches the infrastructure, so it protects all layers, including the cache. It has also a nice side effect that it is universal, so it's disconnected from your origin and works essentially with every backend, being edge delivery services, classical AEM environments, or even your own backends that you configure with origin selectors. We also try to keep it simple, no code, configuration only, and for that we use the OIDC standardized integration, so we rely on a standard, and essentially you can bring your own identity provider that supports this OIDC standard, like Azure, Okta, and so on. So we end up in a solution where the visitor comes in the CDN, the first thing is checked if the session cookie is valid. If not, the user is redirected to the IDP. There is the classical OIDC authorization code flow. They log in, come back, and now a session is established. Everything is done before the AEM CDN cache, and then the request can be served from cache or from the origin. Now, I mentioned earlier that this is compatible essentially with every backend, but in a lightweight way. So it's not like we are bringing the concepts, the security concepts from the backend to the CDN. There is no synchronization. The primary use case is actually edge delivery services, because there's no native solution for user-based authentication on the publish layer for edge delivery services. There used to be one in Helix 4, but it was deprecated in Helix 5. So now with the latest edge delivery services, you can only enforce site authentication token-based, so but it's not user-based. For AEM cloud service environments, still the recommendation is to do it in the origin, because AEM has a very rich permission system that we cannot replicate at the edge, and rely on additional layers in front of AEM, like dispatcher with dispatcher permission sensitive caching, which does some pre-flights before sending content that is cached. And we are actually planning to implement this also, the CDN, something like CDN permission sensitive caching. So, okay. So getting back to the regular request flow, the user is now authenticated. The question next is what should the user be allowed to access? And we explored several authorization use cases. The first one that we'll productize is the all or nothing authorization. So only authentication is required. So this is for very simple authenticated sites. You only need the visitor to be authenticated, and you don't impose any other restrictions. But we went also further with, now the tricky part is that we don't have a full-fledged permission system behind. So we can rely only on the information that is available in the IDP for authorization, and those are typically email. We know the email of the logged in user. The group can be an extension, but is not strictly in the OIDC standard, so it's custom for every IDP. And there is also a flavor who controls the ACLs, or the origin, or the edge. So I will go into that a bit later. So the simplest authorization model is all or nothing. You just require authentication, essentially. you have your company site, you only want your employees to access the site. When you have this in front of AEM Live, you should also make sure that the AEM Live is protected by a header. So you need to only enforce restriction. You also need to enforce restriction at the origin. And to configure this, you do it with our classical CDN rules. We introduced last year the authentication section, which has authenticators. We had basic authentication supported already. Now we introduced a new type of authenticator, which is OIDC Authenticator. It requires a few information about the IDP, the client ID, client secret, and discovery URI. And then you select your domain where this would be available and just require to be authenticated. So now with this, you already have a private site that requires authentication and allows everyone that is authenticated to access the resources. The next iteration of this would be to use the information that is provided by the IDP about the user, and that's specifically the email, and have only allowed emails to access certain paths. So for example, we want only John to access the admin section. And for this, we introduce a new action type, which is authorized. So you are still doing the authentication first. I didn't put it here for brevity, but then you also say, after the user is authenticated, enforce also these authorization rules by email. We also did a POC for groups. Groups are a bit more special because they are not in the standard, so they have a lot of variations between providers. Most of them that we tested with support actually the group claims, the claim groups, and that allows us to configure something in the authenticator. We can configure the supported groups from the IDP and then enforce rules based on the group information that is coming from the IDP. This requires also some more configuration on the IDP side to send also the group claim, but it's working pretty well. I think just one. Here we are still exploring the ideas because sometimes we discover that customers get the group information not from the IDP but from other services. So, and we don't want to introduce too much complexity in this configuration. Okay. Next variant would be actually, so until now all configuration options for authorization were based on these CDN configuration files. So you have to know at development time which paths are accessible by which groups or users. This is not always flexible, so sometimes you want, like with the redirects previously, so sometimes you want actually the content origin, the author, to be able to declare the rules. So we have this mode in which you can configure at the CDN that the allowed groups will come from a header from the origin. And that header will be this one, XAEM allowed groups. So if you want, and then the people that have access to the origin can actually add this header to the responses. This is pretty simple to do in Edge delivery services. You have the headers spreadsheet where you can say that for page HTML, for example, you can put this header to be outputted. So this makes the shift from a configuration at the edge for the permissions towards a configuration at the origin. Okay. Now, let me close just with the presentation of the future work. So in the near future, we want to GA this. We still have to finalize some workflows, but these are the two features that we are looking next to release. So they are still in beta right now, Edge Compute and Edge Authentication. Just one thing, Edge Compute will be a separate SKU, so it will not be included in the base product. Or Edge Authentication will be included in the base product. So there is also this kind of difference between them two. And also we are looking to integrate better with origin authentication in AEM environments. As I said earlier, you can configure OIDC directly in AEM. You can still cache in dispatcher with dispatcher permission sensitive caching. We want to introduce this concept also at the CDN to use to have a notion of CDN permission sensitive caching to do some pre-flights before actually serving from cache. With that, I will hand over to Quentin for a quick demo.
Perfect. Okay, so for the demo, so we wanted to give you a quick overview of what we just talked about today. So for that, let me increase maybe. Up. So I created an HDA site directly in Cloud Manager. So as you might already know, so from Cloud Manager you can now add your HDA site. You will have to go through a to-do list that will allow you to add your domain, add your SSL certificate. In that case, I choose to issue a diva-e certificate. And then I also created an Edge delivery config pipeline that allow me to push my CDN configuration as well as my compute configuration. So for the sake of that demo, I used the standard Edge delivery services boilerplate. And what I wanted to achieve is to basically make only people that can authenticate through Google to access the website. So that's the first thing. And second thing is to use Edge Compute as a proxy to basically get the content, HTML content from Edge Delivery services, so AEM Live, parse it, and automatically inject some HTML in some tags in the HTML. So now, if I try to access this domain, so I will just need to create an incognito window. So you will see that the first thing is that I'm getting redirected to Google, where I will have to authenticate myself. Okay. And after that, I'm automatically redirected to my AEM boilerplate that I'm pretty sure you are all familiar with. And you can see one tiny modification here is that we have some weather information that tells me that I'm based in Frankfurt and that the temperature is around here, 14 degrees. Okay, so those are directly being injected on the flight by Edge Compute. So now let's have a look at how it works. So it all starts with a compute. Let me increase it a bit more. It all starts with a compute configuration file where I defined Edge service service with some configs and secret. The secret is particularly important because we need to connect to a weather API to get the information. And the most interesting part is maybe the CDN configuration file where I first configured an authenticator of type OIDC, where I provided my client ID, my client secret, then some endpoints, so some basic information when configuring OIDC. And then I created a rule that basically says for every request on that domain, I want to force the authentication using the Google Auth Authenticator. For the Edge Compute part, I also created an origin selector rule that says for every traffic with 1 star, select AEM origin and then my compute Edge service. I also set skip cache because I didn't want the cache to be working for the demo. So, but I will not recommend that for a production site. Okay, so now let's have a quick look at the code itself. So it's a JavaScript code. It's basically extracted from the boilerplate. So here we are using a nice library from Fastly called Fastly Expressly that is similar to Express that allow me to create a router and then define some endpoints such as a get weather endpoint as well as a get hole, which will basically do the proxy part where for every incoming request, we automatically override the host to be pointing to our AEM live domain. And on the way back, we look if the request is actually a HTML one, we parse it, and we automatically add our HTML over there. For the parsing, we use Cheerio, but Fastly has also his own HTML parser now. So with that, going back to the slide, and yeah, so that concludes the demo and also the presentation, and I think now we have some time for questions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. That was a great presentation. You have quite a lot of questions. Yeah, so first up, are you planning to allow Edge Compute to be injected in one of 4 places, on request or response, and in front of or behind the cache?
In theory, it's like completely free. So using CDN or reading selector rules, you are actually in charge of routing your traffic to compute whenever you want.
But it will not be in front of the cache. So no, we discuss it quite a lot. We can discuss it also offline. The topology will stay like it was presented, at least for now. So it will be the AEM with the AEM CDN with the cache, and then this will be an origin. The compute will be an origin behind the cache. The reasons are multiple around the visibility of the request and also around the traffic protection, like DDoS protection and so on, that we can do better in the first layer.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay, thank you. Yes, the next question is an additional license required to use Edge Compute on cloud with Fastly?
Yes, there will be an additional SKU, so it will not be in the base product. But we don't have yet the details finalized, so I cannot give you details about the pricing.
Okay, so next it's a big question. Okay. Wouldn't it be better to configure in which claim the group on information sits to do authorization? In large orgs, you don't always have the luxury to ask for modification of the config. So what are your thoughts on it? I'm not sure about the question. So it was raised by Tomasz. If you would like to provide some more clarity on the question.
Maybe it's related to the last point that so.
Yeah, with Sling, yeah, maybe.
Yeah. So I didn't fully get the question. So it's.
Yeah, I feel like it's more a statement than a question, but if you have, if you could clarify, you can.
We will see. So essentially, we can implement something to change the claim name, for example, if it's named groups or internal groups or whatever. So, so that would be an easy change. But also, we are thinking that there will be specific client IDs and client applications that can be, so you will not expose necessarily your internal structure for the website. So probably this can be done on the spot for the integration with the site. So it will be a new client application that can accommodate the group's custom name. So yeah. So I think that we can do. What is more complicated if we want to get the group information from another system. So we've seen this request, like I have my own API that is not linked to the IDP that gives you the groups and so on. That's a bit more tricky to implement generically. So we don't really want to go into very customizable and into a very customizable solution. So yeah.
Next one, how does error handling and logging work in the Edge Compute environment?
So the logging part, basically, if you're familiar with log forwarding, it works exactly the same way. You can configure your own logging endpoint and basically logs whatever you want from your code. And for the error handling you mentioned, yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I'm not sure to understand.
Error handling in compute. So in compute, you are essentially owning the entire code there. So you put your try catch and catch everything.
Yeah.
So, but then you're passing through the CDN layer, so you can also have their custom error pages and things like that. So, but also Quentin showed earlier. So there is this log forwarding, so you can stream to your logging provider like Splunk or whatever, and but then you can also tail the logs live from the compute. So it's a nice feature that you can stream live the logs. This is at least for developing and debugging.
Great. I think that wraps up the Q&A. Thank you again for your great talk and a huge round of applause.
Thank you.